So Canada's new border bill, Bill C2, aka the Strong Borders Act. It was announced a couple of weeks ago and it's since received some backlash. So Marina, it's a big bill, it's about the border, but why is privacy in it?
Yeah, so this is called an omnibus bill. So it's essentially when the government wants to make changes to a bunch of different laws in one piece of legislation. So it deals with immigration, refugees, also police powers, and privacy information. Now they're calling it the border bill because essentially this is in some ways, in many ways, a response to US President Donald Trump. So you'll remember he put these tariffs on Canada saying he had concerns about our borders. And so the federal government has come up with this plan to strengthen Canada's borders. But privacy experts are really worried about this because they say that it is kind of a way for the federal government to ram through a bunch of changes that give police these sweeping powers under the guise of this being to protect our border.
Yeah, so I've seen people talk about this, saying that the police could now open your mail. What's actually happening there?
So this is interesting. Right now in Canada, police are able to search mail if it comes from like a private company, think Amazon. But the way that Canada Post works, because it's governed by this specific legislation, because it's a crown corporation, police can't easily search Canada Post mail or parcels. And so the idea here is that it would enable them to have that search power that they haven't had before.
And then what about what police can access in terms of our personal data online?
Well, that's something that's got security experts and civil liberties groups really concerned because essentially it gives police the authority to force any provider to give some basic information about you. That could be your phone provider, internet, but it could also be apps you use, like messaging apps, and even things like services you've used. So for example, banks, hotels, car rental companies, even hospitals. The information is not necessarily in-depth, but it is kind of key, whether or not you use that, when you used it, and maybe where you were. And all of this can be done without a warrant. If police want more details, say for example, the context of your messages, they would have to go to a court and get a warrant to do that. Another concern is that it's very broad.
If law enforcement, for whatever reason, suspects that someone is going to go camping in a place without a permit this weekend, they can use that to obtain this information because it applies to any violation of any act of Parliament.
So when this information is accessed, who can they share it with?
So law enforcement, other law enforcement within Canada, but also potentially law enforcement internationally. And for example, the Citizen Lab at University of Toronto gives some examples. So say an American who is living in a state that has abortion ban, they might come to Canada to get an abortion. Could, police in the United States go to Canadian authorities and get this information to find out if someone's had an abortion in Canada? That's a concern. Or could Canadian police share this information with police in another country, and then that information is used against Canadian citizens? It's something called transnational repression. We've seen that in Canada, where people living here are the target of threats or violence because of a foreign state kind of trying to act against them. So that could be a risk as well.
I've also read that police are saying that this is really needed right now.
Yeah, they're big advocates of this legislation because they said right now the issue is crime is not like it used to be. It's across borders. It's often facilitated on the internet, but they're really working with legislation, they say, that is not meant for that. Police also say it's important because they need to be able to keep up with the technology that criminals now use.
So what has the government said about all this criticism so far?
Well, the Public Safety Minister, Gary Endensangri, who introduced this legislation, says that he feels like they have struck the balance. He's actually a human rights lawyer by trade, and he says he's very confident that this legislation gives police these extra powers that they need to take on this crime and deal with the border, but also protect the civil liberties of Canadians.
So then, I guess, why is this all wrapped into a bill that's supposed to be about the border?
Well, if you think about things like drugs, human trafficking, all these big issues that we're talking about right now, a lot of those things are facilitated online and a lot of those things go across borders. So that makes sense. But, the public safety minister also said that this legislation was aimed to satisfy some what he called U.S. irritants. So again, those things that Donald Trump has been raising about Canada's border. But also, he says, to deal with some existing issues here in Canada. But again, civil liberties groups say if we have issues in terms of police's ability to get this information, it should not be rolled into a bill about the border.
So could any of this backlash change anything in this bill?
All the opposition parties have raised concerns about it. Conservatives, the NDP, saying that they're really worried about some of the privacy issues that they see in this legislation. We are in a minority government, so the Liberals are going to need someone to vote along with this legislation. And any piece of legislation has to go through the House of Commons process, which includes committees. So that's where witnesses will come and testify. The MPs can debate the legislation. They might suggest changes. So it's possible what we're seeing now might not be the final legislation.
Right, well, lots to come.